be here. I love you all.
Hello and welcome to the Scannain Podcast, your weekly look at the world of film, Irish and international. I'm Darren Mooney, and joining me are
Jay
and Ronan.
And this week we're broadcasting live from the Dublin Feminist Film Festival, and we are sort of in the midst of that at the moment. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we normally talk about, but I think before we do, we've literally just came from a screening on Wednesday night of the festival's shorts, and also of Parklands, which is the Cate Blanchett's first starring role, a 51-minute film from Australia from 1996. So we're recording directly afterwards. So you're getting a fresh response here, listeners. And all three of us have seen it, which should make for perhaps an interesting discussion before we jump into what we watched, because what we all watched was 10 shorts in Parkland. So what did we make of them, guys?
It was a good bunch, I think, to launch the festival. There were serious talks last night, but this was the launch of the films proper, and there were some real absolute standouts. I think we are pretty much agreed on the best among the bunch. Panic Attack.
Yes, riotous kind of
Eileen O'Mara, is it?
Yeah, Eileen O'Mara, an extremely sort of extravagantly funny animation that has all these sort of swirling lines that create this strange situation. It all happens within the course of about 30 seconds as somebody's waiting at a traffic light. And it's just incredibly imaginative. I was really, really taken with it.
Very thoughtful, but also very funny and very much about the kind of demons in your head, but also the literal kind of manifestation of that. And how it can be, and I was very impressed by it. Yeah,
simultaneously looking at the seriousness and the ridiculously of all the little thoughts nagging at us every second.
It was by far the standout for me. Yeah, Panic Attack. I think it's the best film. I think the one that finished second, which was called Losing It,
which was the opening one.
Yeah, was probably my second favorite, and I really liked it. Very affecting, very smart, very
intimate, and starring two very charming newcomers who are also credited with additional material in the script as well, suggesting that there's some level of improvisation.
Yeah, it feels particularly naturalistic, like an actual conversation two people would have in this situation, and it achieves the rare thing of making me really, really laugh at a fart joke.
Yes, indeed, which is a rare thing.
Yeah, it's very good, very, very funny.
Do you want to talk then a little bit about Parklands, which was the feature film it's the feature film that opened it. It runs 51 minutes. It's from Australia from 1996. And it's an interesting choice in some respects. I know the film festival have chosen to highlight female directors and female cinematographers. Yeah. And in many cases, like a Cate Blanchett's first starring role. Mm-hmm.
I think the cinematography thing is just going on from the conversation yesterday at the kind of launch and the kind of talk about cinematographers and female cinematographers. The cinematographer whose name is Nikki Thomas.
Mandy Walker?
No, yeah. Well, the director is somebody that sounds similar to
Kathryn Millard is the director.
Jesus, okay, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Anyway, the cinematographer has gone on to bigger and better things, and I think she's doing the cinematographer on Mulan, the live action version of it.
That's coming up.
Yeah. Things like that. So she's on. She did I saw to Ronan that she made Lantana. She was cinematographer on Lantana, which is a terrific Australian thriller.
Recently, Jane Got a Gun, Hidden Figures.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, so that's a pretty good.
Yeah. And the strength of Parkland is that cinematography. It kind of appropriates this kind of 60s Adelaide kind of government education videos, for want of a better word, the kind of tourism kind of videos.
It sort of intercuts them, which is interesting.
But it makes we're talking about the idea of filmmakers kind of shooting stuff on old stock to make films look kind of real and stuff. But this really does it. Yeah, and it makes up a lot for a lot of the narrative contrivances
and some of the dialogue
which is a bit hammy and
I think
to say the least.
I may have my favorite piece of dialogue from the year, replacing "I am not pregnant with new life, but with death,"
which
from
is a glorious,
which is a fantastic line. Yeah. It's Ingmar Bergman writes Heat for Lifetime, which is just it's an amazing confluence of events. And this one has.
That's the final line in the film.
It's the final line in the film. And
what a finish.
Isn't going to spoil it for anybody who's listening, but Cate Blanchett reflects, "It seemed my father was about to retire from the police force. But how do we retire from this world of shadows and secrets?"
I think we had this weird effect where I sort of giggled. Darren, you then started laughing beside me, and I sort of exploded a little bit. I couldn't really contain it. It's a dreadful line, and it really undoes the good work that's been done the 20 minutes before that, I think. Because I think what success the film has in atmosphere is down to the cinematography. So I can absolutely understand why it was chosen as the opening feature.
It's very atmospheric, and I mean, it has that sort of It's weird to describe as a 90s type texture, in that it's got obviously the 4:3 aspect ratio and stuff like that, but it's also got, it looks, I imagine it was shot in film and everything like that, but it has this video quality when you look at it that sort of evokes the 90s as a period of time.
Probably, and that probably works to its favour to some degree, but I think Ronan mentioned it before we come out of it, that it could probably do with a scrub up in terms of
in terms of remastering.
It'd be intriguing to see what it looked like. Because I imagine it looks kind of
beautiful. Because it's as you pointed out, it's got these rich greens and yellows and stuff like that. It's got this very effective sort of striking image.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of what Fincher did in The Game, and the kind of flashback, kind of those looks. Yeah. The kind of the kind of people that are a bit older looking at the camera like it's a foreign object kind of thing, as opposed to the naturalistic way it kind of works these days.
And that sort of like Kodachrome overexposure.
Yeah. There's a bit of that as well.
But yeah, so I think we all watched that. But let's talk about let's jump into the regular section, which is what have we watched separately, guys?
Ooh.
So over the past week, or since last you've been on, what have you watched, Jay?
I have a list of films to catch up on towards the end of the year, and so what I did was to watch 2 that weren't on it, and I had no intention of watching instead of watching the actual list, because I don't learn any year ever. So we'll jump right in. I watched the Meg.
Jason Statham versus a giant shark, and somehow nowhere near as exciting.
Darren tried to warn me.
If only there had been some kind of warning that you might not enjoy.
Darren did try to warn me.
And Darren loves this sort of film.
Yeah, me too. And I'm a huge Statham fan. I'm a huge giant shark fan.
Yeah. I mean, I can find things I like about Venom.
I know you can find things you like about anything.
Oh yeah, this is lifeless. This
is just the ultimate sin. It's neither good enough to be serious or not nearly bad enough to be fun.
Yeah, it has precisely it's 3 films crammed together. Any one of them would have been a perfectly decent sort of mid-tier blockbuster on its own, but it takes one of 3 acts from each of those 3 different films, and it knows what the audience wants and it withholds. Yeah. It has precisely two money shots, and they come within 30 seconds of one another at the climax. Yeah. And you're just like,
no.
What did you think you were making?
And like the first 15-20 minutes, I kind of liked it. It hit all the kind of tropey bits of the prologue where, it sets up the guy has to overcome
a dark secret past.
And that's why I like those kind of things. And, you're thinking, all right, they know what they're doing here. There's a bit of
I particularly like the moment where after he rescues the sub, like you have the female lead stating his character arc for the film. You would always leave people behind because that's who you are. And then the camera focuses on Jason Statham's face. And it's like, there's really nothing in his characterization outside of people saying this out loud that supports this. But I'm on board.
And then it cuts to 10 years later, 8 years or whatever it is. And then the film sinks to the bottom. It's not
literally and figuratively.
It's not fun.
Yes.
I didn't enjoy it. And my enjoyment, after the kind of first 20 minutes, which I kind of enjoyed, it plummeted. And the sharks are silly, and not in a good silly, like a Deep Blue Sea type of silly. They're giant, ridiculous CGI messy,
sort of
not exactly.
And the weird thing about it is that it. And again, I wonder if you can spoil a film that's been out in cinemas. Like if people want to see the Meg, they've seen the Meg already.
Yeah.
But the big twist in the Meg amounts to at the point between the second and third acts of the movie,
where it's nearly over.
Where it's nearly over is that this gigantic shark that we've been chasing, there's actually an even more gigantic shark out there, it turns out. And you're like,
and it bites the big shark.
Yeah, and you're
by being a bigger. It's
at this sense of scale, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's like
and people can't react against because everybody knows it's nonsense because it's CGI.
It was like the shark was already bigger than we could imagine. How can you argue that it's bigger than something that's bigger than we can imagine?
I mean, the cast really try. They give it their all, but my God, it's a lot to ask of any cast. And this cast isn't exactly the A team as such.
But I mean, I don't mind that. I don't mind having a B team cast doing a disaster movie.
But they've nothing to react to.
That's a fact. Yeah, the fact is they have nothing to work with. Like Rainn Wilson, who plays a wonderful.
He plays the guy out of Wolf of Wall Street, the Steve Madden, essentially.
Yeah, he plays the obligatory disaster movie capitalist character.
He comes in, a billionaire tech specialist with runners and, kind of.
Yeah, and there's the moment where, after the first act is over, which is the bit where they go underwater, where you have a scene in the boardroom where he's like, I mean, we can't let those people die for nothing. We have to find a way to monetize this. And you're like, well, I see where the film is going. It's going to set up him doing something stupid for money, and that's going to lead to everybody dying. But the film moves so frantically and so excitedly that you cut from that scene to, oh my God, there's a giant shark. And it has nothing to do with this boardroom scene that we were just in.
What they do with that character is absolutely bizarre. Oh, yeah. It's really odd. It's like, it makes no sense structurally or
thematically.
Logically. Yeah, it's like, okay, hang on, he's there. All right, he does that. Okay. Oh, no. Oh, right, yeah. Why? Why is all that happening now? And then it has this kind of weird subpar Thunderbirds thing where both of them get into these water tank things at the end. It's like, what am I watching? What is this film? Has this become a superhero film?
Yeah, where Jason Statham puts on basically like an underwater Iron Man suit.
And then somebody else
does as well.
It
goes mano versus the shark.
It is absolutely...
Which shark?
The bigger one.
The big giant one.
the one that's bigger than you can even imagine.
And this film has beaten you to exhaustion at this point. It's like,
I haven't seen it. I want
Jason Statham to die in this, and I never want Jason Statham to die in films.
Did it make money?
Yeah, it did. Chinese market
and the Chinese market is a huge part of it.
Heavily into
You can tell very much that it's aimed at the Chinese market.
And this beach that the shark goes there, right, exists like no beach in the world exists, where 20,000 people are 100 feet into the water, floating.
In water deep enough to support a shark bigger than you can imagine.
In a small bay. Like, there's about 20,000 people, about 100, 200 feet out into the water, all splashing around in colours.
Of course.
Like, what? Like, the shark has to be there because,
It's a shark movie.
But it is Staith versus Mega Shark. Don't go play logic.
That's the problem. It's not.
Yeah,
Up until the final, there's 30 seconds where you get what you paid for, which is Staith versus Giant Shark. And it involves that underwater Iron Man suit.
So it's like fun.
Yeah. And then it has, there's one money shot. And the film, in fairness to it, knows that this is the money shot. It's the moment where Statham is, cast out of the metal suit with nothing but a harpoon to protect him against the elements.
Yes, and he does something that...
It gives you the one shot that the movie's been building towards. But the issue is that's all it gives you.
And it's like, it likes to think that's enough. That's all. There's the film. You loved it.
2 hours. It's like an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours.
It's bad. Yeah. It's really... There's so many Statham films I'd happily rewatch. I will never sit through this again.
Yeah.
But if the Meg 2 comes out and they get somebody better to direct it, I may well turn up for that.
Jay.
I'm sorry. I'm a sucker for the shark
film. It could be the Crank 2 high voltage of shark films.
Like a goldfish, I have a short movie.
I love Crank.
Okay,
no,
hang on.
I'm saying that as a good thing.
Can I just say Crank and Crank 2
but I feel like
they are brilliant. Both films are brilliant.
Yeah.
The second one is amazing.
But I feel like if the Meg 2 were to make a leap in quality equivalent between Crank and Crank 2, you'd be like, well, it wasn't entirely awful.
Yeah.
I think Crank 2 is better.
I love Crank 2.
Me too.
No, I think it is better, but I think the degree is...
Yeah.
It's not minimal.
But
it's not.
But it won't take much to take the Meg up 50%, though, is what I'm saying. And I'll be there, because I can't help myself. But anyway.
What else did you watch, Jay?
Something much better, and it was on my list, Crazy Rich Asians. Which I found extremely pleasant. Very enjoyable. A terrific Constance Wu, or really like, very charming. Really well shot. Really aware of its colours and what it's doing and what it's showing, and kind of snazzily moves the camera around.
John Chu directs it. It's very, very aware of the mechanics of it. It plays a number of big jokes in the background rather than through inserts, which is a remarkably confident thing for a modern romantic comedy to do. So for example, it will allow characters to react in the background of shots rather than going look at their face.
Yeah.
Or it'll do things like where it pays off a very obvious joke, a joke that's been building to for 30 seconds in the background of the shot, but it'll pay it off in the background of the shot rather than cutting to it, which is a remarkable degree of confidence.
Yeah, I really like that. It's one of those ones that I could see myself happily watching again. I'll come on TV, or it's just it's one of those good time movies that actually delivers.
Times, and I
can see that. I can actually see why somebody would kind of say, "Oh, it's on again."
Say I was crazy about it.
I don't want to say that, but it's good. It was really, really good. Very, very enjoyable. And another one that I kind of really surprised, and this is where we're going to have a disagreement, Darren. Because we were in full agreement on the Meg, so I went against you again, and this time it worked well for me. Skyscraper.
Yes,
Skyscraper. I really, really enjoyed, a lot.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not kidding.
But Skyscraper is just San Andreas in a skyscraper.
What's wrong with that?
You didn't like San Andreas.
I didn't mind it. There's problems with it, but I didn't mind it.
That's a very fair answer.
But it's got this.
It's better than San Andreas.
It is. It doesn't have Paul Giamatti. This is the biggest quake in the history of.
It does miss Giamatti. That's true.
Giamatti needs to be the guy downstairs in the control room of the
skyscraper. It's
like
you need a heavyweight.
Yeah, this is the biggest skyscraper in the history of mankind.
The thing of it is, right? There are issues. It's not perfect, right? There's two real issues that the film has. One, it can't hide its this is going to come back in the final act bits all the way through.
All the
there's 3 or 4,
about how the
and
thing
it's
works.
horrid.
Yeah.
Like, right, that's
how
horrible.
The skyscraper works.
Yeah, right, that's horrible. And every time I hear it, I groaned inwardly. It's like, I wonder when I'm going to see that. And without perception, I did. The other thing it does is it really leans heavily into the tech stuff, which is going to age it extremely badly. I imagine this film's going to look far worse than, say, the Terror and Inferno looks now.
Yeah.
Which I think looks great. But, you know,
it's also the amount of CGI on
it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt the film really badly. But like it works really well as a kind of 80s action film, and obviously Die Hard is the kind of touchstone here. But
it's very consciously aiming for that. Yeah.
But it's like surprisingly violent. Kind of the action scenes are quite good, and it's 102 minutes, which a lot of blockbusters could really, really learn from.
That's still too long.
It gives Neve Campbell something to do, and she's good.
But she doesn't really get that much.
I think she does. I completely disagree. I think she gets plenty to do and saves the MF day.
Yeah, okay. Well,
I'm happy with that. I liked it quite a bit.
My big issue with Skyscraper is that it does the same thing with the disaster movie that San Andreas does. It turns it into a superhero movie. The disaster movie genre, and particularly a Skyscraper, where you have literal levels of people, it's all about like building an ensemble. Whereas here, it becomes The Rock single-handedly.
But it's Rock versus building, which is fine because
it's Rock versus Eurotrash.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. It builds in, like when he gets to go in the building. The thing about kind of disaster films, particularly around a kind of a building or burning building or tall thing, the tension is built on what happens around kind of hanging on, things falling, slipping, and it does that really, really well to the point where I know that The Rock's not going to die here, right? It's just The Rock. It's an action film. But I was still extremely tense for huge chunks of it, despite that. And I think if you do that, you're doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I say. I really liked it.
All right, you think it's a towering accomplishment?
I really like. It's not Terror and Inferno good, but it's really enjoyable.
Doesn't quite scale that.
No, it doesn't scale that height. It's very late.
What else have you watched, Jay?
Right. I after the kind of the launch of the Feminist Film Festival yesterday, where they talked about it, I think it was Paula Quigley gave it a thing on cinematographers and history of cinematographers and directors in early Hollywood.
Was fascinating.
Yeah, it really was, about kind of the writing them out of history and all that kind of stuff, and it was really interesting in that regard. And I was talking to Ronan earlier about it, that whilst we know without researching that these things happen, to see names being kind of laid out one after the other, it's kind of
and there obviously a bit of background and the amount of work that they did,
and the amount of films made, and
not even the publicity around the films they made as well. Like there are posters, and there are newspaper articles covering this from the early 1920s that just got massively erased. By the way, Paula Quigley's talk was amazing.
Oh, it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Extremely, the context around it was very good. The information was great. But I decided to watch on one of the Alice Guy Blanchet, I think it is, films was on Filmstruck. So it's The Ocean Waif from 1916, and it was 41 minutes, half of Arda.
My God!
I said yes, I'm going to watch that. So I watched that. There's a couple of issues around the restoration. There's kind of some, if you've ever seen like the restoration Metropolis, and there's missing scenes and kind of thing, and it's fine once you know that it works. You know, it's only, it doesn't really kind of, it's not
a relic. It's
exactly. It's 102 years old. Like,
if we all look that,
that's
what all that piece is missing on me.
Indeed, yes. But it's really interesting. There's a kind of thing that comes from, and when it was particularly around the infancy of film, a lot of the stories came from kind of stock plays and stuff like that, kind of very standard characters. So you get the kind of ogre stepfather, the waif who's kind of, weak-willed against him, and then just a handsome cad who might be rich that might save her. So it's kind of stock fairy tale romance thing, which is fine. Like, once you know that in kind of film history, that's kind of where you're going to get. But it plays off it quite well. Doris Kenyon is the lead, who's great, because when you get the intertitles and her reaction shots to things that are going on is very knowing, and I presume the directors and cinematography is very aware too. And she works really well. It's an inevitable happy ending to it. But like a lot of the stuff is kind of forgettable and it's kind of makeup. But there's some nice moments. There's things like, the rich guy is like, oh, I want to buy that house, and somebody's like, well, it's haunted by a young woman, and then at the same time she's breaking into the house, so it's this kind of misunderstanding that she's a ghost, which is fine. I like that kind of stuff. It's great fun, a bit of farce and all that kind of jazz. It's fine, and there's a couple of really nice shots. There's one in particular where there's kind of behind her, a shot from behind the main character. She looks out, which is it was kind of disconcerting because everything else is kind of straight camera.
Yeah, absolutely. That's unusual for the time.
It was, exactly. It kind of threw me completely. I was like, and it's really nice, and that's a kind of slightly sinister undertone to it.
Yeah.
So there's obviously kind of real talent kind of going on here, particularly in a constrained time as well in terms of what film's made of. But really like that. not great, but as a fascinating kind of object and something that's that old, it's really, really interesting.
It's good to see as well in the context of all the names that were mentioned in the talk yesterday. Cate Blanchett is one who's kind of come to a sort of critical reassessment over the last couple of years. Her name has been rediscovered, and she, as part of the Women Film Pioneers Project, her stuff has been resurfaced. So it's good to see that she's one of these names that's seriously benefiting from this.
There's not a huge amount available from what I gather, but I'm going to try to catch a couple more if I can.
That's generally the deal with the films at the time. Like,
it's 75% of the silent films are
lost.
Which is absolutely depressing.
Obscene.
Yeah, but it's still worth to watch, and like I think some of them are on YouTube as well. They're probably worth checking out.
Yeah, they're all probably in the public domain.
Well, that's it. They all predate Mickey Mouse, because Mickey Mouse is the moment where copyright will never pass.
Right.
Yeah. Nobody's mousing about it.
Finally, I watched the Varda short because Varda season never ends.
It's Varda time.
How many Vardas long was it?
It was half an hour.
So, half an hour. 37.5% of a Varda.
Yeah, which I thought was a fine
calculation.
I don't know if you made it up because I'm not that good at maths, but I believe you.
The numbers check out. Our scienticians have backed it up.
Good. I'm glad. And the one was
this is where the Scannain budget goes.
Black Panthers.
Excellent.
Which is short about the Black Panthers, obviously enough. And it's kind of set around, it's filmed around a protest in Oakland in I think 68, if I remember correctly, and it's Huey Newton who'd been arrested for murder, and this protest to try to get him freed. So the camera's kind of going around talking to some of the leaders of the movement, particularly Kathleen Eager, I think it is, who's one of the kind of leaders, and she talks about the Natural Hair Project and how women are taking leadership roles in Black Panther and stuff. So obviously Varda's obviously interested in that kind of stuff. And it's quite clear where Varda's sympathies lie here, and it's not with the police.
I would be surprised.
No, I know,
yes.
And they're coming from a country like France where,
well, particularly
protest,
in the 1960s,
late
60s,
exactly,
where you were having that sort of climate.
Exactly. And it's an interesting one. There's a couple of things like it's if you've seen any Varda films, there's some superbly framed shots that add so much, like the background stuff that she does, like particularly documentary. She's very good at like adding information just by where she places the camera, and it's really impressive in that regard. But there's one really thing that irked the hell out of me. There's this strange and unnecessary voiceover throughout the film explaining the kind of politics and what's going on, which the camera pretty much and the people pretty much do. It's either early on in her, like kind of when she went to the States with Jacques Demy at the time, and this probably, I didn't really check the chronology in terms of her other films, but it seems kind of like either somebody panicked and added a voiceover, or she felt that it wasn't clear or whatever, but it really takes away from the film and kind of annoyed the hell out of me, because it didn't need to be there, because everything you're seeing on screen and being interviewed, so it kind of took away, unfortunately.
That kind of commercial consideration isn't something you see sneak into her work.
Yeah,
really,
I haven't seen it before, and it kind of like, but so it's kind of a mere 3-star. But still very interesting though, like well worth watching as the Varda season rolls on, and invariably till the end of time by the looks of things. But that's me for the week.
And Ronan, what have you watched this week?
I am all for continuity on this, so I took Jay's personal recommendation from last week and watched Werner Herzog's Lessons of Darkness, which is currently on Mubi, though perhaps not in this territory.
But in Europe.
I love that you've branched out. It's no longer just films that will be removed from Mubi by the time that you hear this. It's films that were never on the Mubi that you have access to. I like that.
Excuse me, I think you'll find I have access to this.
I was talking to the listener, Ronan. It's not always about you.
I did point out that it was on Mubi Germany last week.
It is also
if you have
gone.
US Netflix. It's
okay. Yes, it's on US Netflix.
It's on Netflix in America.
For our many US listeners.
Yes.
But I like that we managed to hit a movie that was not only on Mubi in a different jurisdiction, but also had been removed. Yes,
in fairness, I started it, so
you did. In fairness.
Anyway, moving on.
Oh God.
I think Jay covered it well last week, but one thing that struck me immediately, between the kind of classical compositions that Herzog uses, the sort of existing music, he has a lot of stuff from Wagner in there, and his swooping cinematography that comes, I think, from helicopters. It's absolutely incredible.
It's absolutely
but he shoots it in such a way, and his own voiceover, which is sort of, even at this point, 92, sort of knowingly getting into the Herzog persona that he's gone on to parody American Dad and stuff like this.
It looms over stuff.
Yeah.
Rick and Morty.
Yeah.
And The Simpsons. I love that Werner Herzog has become like America's sort of adorable, creepy foreign uncle.
Yeah. And that's kind of measure of how much he's entered the mainstream. But even in 92, he was aware of this persona of his and is kind of playing on it in his narration, which is very much, from the perspective of, ooh, look at this strange foreign planet, which is clearly Earth. But he does this amazing thing between the music, that cinematography, and his narration. I really came to think of something like Star Wars. It has this sort of approach over the desert where you think, this is some strange planet, what's going on here? Recognizable, yet completely different. And it proceeds...
Now I want to see Herzog's Star Wars. Forget about...
There you go.
Yeah, forget about David Lynch's Return of the Jedi. Herzog's Star Wars.
It would be fascinating. Although his last desert film did not go well, by all accounts. Queen of the Desert, right?
Haven't seen it.
I haven't either. I tend with Herzog to stray away from narrative a lot of the time. Latter-day narrative, at least.
His docs are... Yeah.
His docs are fantastic. Yeah. And this is absolutely straight up there. One of my top 5 of his, probably. And I adore Herzog documentaries.
Yeah, it's up there for me.
It's very, very strangely moving with these images of oil fields burning and his narration cutting in to say, this is not water, it is oil. It is moving, and it's like, what are we doing to our planet? And there is a slight ecological kind of thing there, and also about the whole kind of democratic process, because initially the first shot is over a city that's pre-bombing essentially, and he's like, okay, what will happen next? And we move on. It's got some astonishing contrasts between,
Malik a little bit. Sorry.
There is something sort of distinct about it. I think especially the way the music works with the imagery. There is that sort of sweeping. You get caught up in it, and everybody will engage with it in a different way. But I think it manages this strange kind of emotion. Yeah. For Herzog's style is often quite emotionally removed. But he always talks about the idea of the ecstatic truth, getting at a truth beyond truth. And there are some of his, especially when he's dealing with human subjects here, where he's got somebody translating a woman talking about her child, and it's so horrific and terrible that you get the sense of Herzog behind the camera, quite probably prodding her and getting her to say more terrible things. He does that. He pushes things to the point where they're not quite real to get at an emotional truth. It really, really works here. I really love this.
I do remember from I can't remember the name of the documentary, but it's like, tell me about your encounter with a squirrel.
That was the death row one.
Yes, and the guy
it's the strangest thing. He's asking him all these questions about, do you not feel any guilt? Where is your morality? And then asks about a squirrel, and the guy just and Herzog does that. He finds a way to get inside people's heads and to sort of poke holes in their armor, and it works so well.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great, doc.
And despite being 2 weeks, well, I have 2 things in the box office top 10, but despite being
fancy,
I know, unusual,
very
right?
Off-brand.
Mm-hmm. Despite it being 2 weeks since I've been on, I only have one other thing, but that is Call Me by Your Name, which I watched for the 4th time. I know, how unlike me. Yeah, the Lighthouse brought it back yet again. Bless them, keep doing it, please, please, please.
They will.
They had it last Thursday as well, if I remember correctly.
Thursday and Saturday they had it. I can't remember what the occasion was. They always managed to find an occasion.
Being released.
Ah, yes, of course. I was racking my brain about this, going, what on earth is causing this?
Obviously, it made quite an impression.
I don't know about Thursday. I know Grace was there. Shout out to Grace, who I'm sure loved it just as much as I did. Again,
she upgraded it to a 5-star film, I believe.
I did not.
She can speak to that.
And I'm sure she will, and I look forward to it. It was not a full house on Saturday, actually. It was kind of quiet. Which suits me, Fewer people see me weeping like that, the better. This is my 4th time watching it. It's actually been a while since I last saw it, because I think I saw it in sort of 2-month intervals the first 3 times. So release 2 months later. And that makes it about a year and a bit since the last one, probably. Leaving it, a bit of time and space. I adore it at this point. It does so many things so well, and I think especially in the context of stuff that we may come to speak about later, it's very important for the position it occupies in mainstream cinema in terms of where it did in the awards and where it did financially, in recalibrating queer narratives in such a way that without forgetting tragedy, it reclaims tragedy. So it allows a queer audience to see tragedy, because queer narratives in cinema especially have been seen for a long time through a straight gaze, where you get, a sort of inherent moralizing in the way these always...
I can't possibly figure out what film in the top 10 you could be referring to. Yeah. Listeners, answers on a back of a postcard before we get there.
I'm going to deflate at some point. Let's keep something in me for a while. But Call Me By Your Name does that beautifully, I think, and it allows you to have this really tragic romance that, of course, through that incredible Michael Stuhlbarg scene near the end, that sort of allows you to have that tragedy without feeling it's robbing you of something.
It's not tragic, but it's tragedy, if you know what I mean.
There is a bittersweetness to it, yeah. And this, unquestionably, and I think the fact it's set in the past, it's very consciously gesturing this kind of thing. It is a tragedy. They cannot have this relationship because of the time, because of attitudes to that kind of relationship at the time, despite what Stuhlbarg and his character have going on. You know, it's a wider society problem. But the film uses that in a way that we haven't seen in mainstream cinema, especially before now, and there've been a lot of it. Like Carol will be re-released in the Lighthouse next month as well.
Nice.
for the
Christmas season. It's a
Christmas
Carol.
It's a great ad,
and it does a similar thing.
Yeah.
And that's increasingly happening in the mainstream, which makes it disappointing when things fall back. But more of that anon.
All right, we look forward to that. I had a relatively quiet week, so I'm going to jump back to last week when we were under a bit of time crunch, and I said we weren't going to talk about They Shall Not Grow Old. We're going to talk about
Darren.
They Shall Not Grow Old. So They Shall Not Grow Old, which was released the Remembrance Day weekend in cinemas, aired on BBC Two on the Sunday night. A controversial piece of work among cinephiles. One that generated massive discussion, particularly online. It seems to have actually reached people, which is what they're trying to do. This is Peter Jackson's taking of World War I footage and recoloring it, digitally remastering it, adding voiceover that is apparently modeled on as far as they can discern, the movements of the lips of the characters in question. And it's an interesting effort. I would
add 3D in there, although not
there
at
is
home.
3D, but
there
not
is
at
3D
home.
instead
There
of
is
3D.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's everywhere you want to be.
How many frames
per second? These are the questions. It's an interesting film. I know there are philosophical and moral objections from certain cinema fans, including one who may be sitting at this table, to the use of footage in this manner. I am somewhat ambivalent with those particular concerns in that I would argue that the original footage still exists. The original footage is still available. In fact, I believe that Jackson has made 100 hours of footage restored, both in that colorized fashion, but also the stuff that was just scrubbed up and cleaned up in sort of the way that you do, available to other documentary filmmakers. So I think that even if you don't care for this project, that's a net good. I also think that, and again, this is something that goes on in film restoration circles, where people who like these films, and understandably, and if we're being honest, like understandably, and there's an element of it with me as well, where you treat stuff like remastering, reframing, aspect ratio, altering, even colorization as monstrous bastardizations of the original, and they are to an extent. But they also serve to make these films available to a generation of people who are not cinephiles. And that's grand. Well, you know, I am never going to watch the colorized version of It's a Wonderful Life.
Nobody does.
Actually, you'd be surprised.
I would be surprised. Okay.
But yeah, kids apparently watch it.
That died on its arse, though, that colorization of old films.
It did die.
Because for the reason.
Okay, but at the same time, it's still released in the colorized version. It's still available in home media in the colorized version to people who are buying it.
I've never seen it in a shop.
But
it is criminal. It's absolutely criminal.
This is for a generation of kids who don't watch black and white movies.
That's an insult to kids, I have to say.
I once forced my younger sister to watch a black and white film, and she really enjoyed it. So forse your children to watch these things.
This is exactly it.
Okay. And welcome to the Scannain Podcast, where three people without kids will tell you how to raise your kids.
When I was growing up, I watched black and white films because you watch black and white films. Parents are responsible for when the kids are kids to what they watch, and that goes as well for war footage or anything like that. That's a decision you make, whether to show them at what age, etc., etc. They should be watching that irrespective of whether it's in 3D or not.
Okay, and my counterpoint to that would be as wonderful and idealistic and as perfect as the world that you described would be. The truth is that this reached people who it wouldn't otherwise reach. I'm not talking about children. I'm talking about casual.
That's fine. But casual people should know what happened in World War I by now. I mean,
they should.
I mean, who doesn't? It's a World War.
The idea of this is taking it and making it real in inverted commas by reading letters from.
No.
Okay.
No. Well, I understand that's the intention. My point is education around schools and everything else should bloody have already done that job.
Okay.
And England's a special big case because of its own
England have
issues.
Their own issues, and we're going to come to that in a moment. Because as much and this is the thing, I have no. Well, Jay has very strong philosophical objections. That I have minimal ones because it's people in my office were watching it, and it was the only way that they would watch that footage. Or people that I would browse the hashtag on Twitter, and
what
people
age?
who were like. In my office, we're talking 30, 40 years old.
They don't know anything about wars. Is that what you're saying?
No, not that they don't know anything about wars, but they never would go down to the records office and read personal correspondence.
You can just go online and watch on YouTube.
Okay.
Like, there's footage of everything.
No, I'm pretty sure that people with families aren't like, what am I going to spend my weeknight doing? Googling, these...
But the reason why you wouldn't do that is not because you're not aware of it. The reason you don't do that is because it's horrifying, etc., etc.
Okay.
And who wants to spend their evening watching World War I footage? My point is that people are already aware of World War I, World War II, etc., etc. So who was this aimed at in that context?
I imagine, and again, I went to the hashtag. We're talking people who are 12, 13 years old at home watching this. We're talking people talking about...
Don't they learn history in school?
They should. Whether or not they do to any degree that's worth...
But school and parenting is where the responsibilities lie,
history has been dropped from the junior cert, hasn't it?
It's being considered as a potential optional
subject. It's an optional
Madness.
subject.
Absolute
it's an optional subject
madness.
at Leaving Cert already, which is absurd, but it's considered being
Is
dropped
it?
from... Yep.
Yeah,
I did
that's
as
been for a long time.
Yep.
Sake.
I did.
I did. History should be absolute mandatory.
Oh, absolutely, and 110%. And
while God, my head.
And while I would love to live in Jay's utopia,
it's not a utopia.
It's a much
teenagers aren't going to watch World War films, but 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds who have no better and no control over TV should be goddamn made to watch stuff about war.
Can I leap in here and ask, what is he doing with the footage? Is it made into just a narrative kind of thing?
It's a documentary. So it basically cuts across. It has all this and this is where the issue. I do have very serious issues with the film, but they're not to do with the restoration. He takes the footage, he colorizes it, he reads letters from soldiers sent from the front line, using actors and impersonators and stuff like that. He also looks at the lip movements of people in these films and adds dialogue over it to create a sense of it being more than like silent film footage from 1916 through 1914 through 1919 or whatever. 18. Apologies. But see, this is why we need this documentary, Jay.
Stop it.
Sorry, you did walk right into that one.
I did.
But anyway, so he does that and he dubs it over. So you have shots of people who are like moving ammunition around, talking, like making small banter and conversation in a way that seems more, and there is an uncanny valley effect, but it's still, even watching it myself, still feels more tangible and real than watching a grainy, scratchy, black and white, poor resolution image of that same footage with no sound playing over it. And yes, that is a deficiency in the human condition. Yes, that is a deficiency in how we teach our kids. But I feel like if you can't fundamentally change those things, and I don't think Peter Jackson individually can, I think this is not the worst way to get around it. But my issues with the film are more fundamental than that in terms of the narrative that he constructs. Because what's not discussed in the restoration of this footage is that all of this footage is pulled from propaganda. All this footage was filmed by like the War Ministry and stuff like that. It was footage of soldiers doing things that they wanted soldiers to do for the purposes of showing it before films in cinemas. For the purpose of recruiting.
But World War I was particularly harsh in that regard.
But it means that the film has this big gaping lacuna at its core where you have this footage of everybody getting ready to go into battle, but everybody looking neat and joking round and it being like, well, if you go to war, you'll meet a lot of nice people and have a lot of great experiences. And you do get some of the horror when they talk about it in letters and they talk about the conditions and they talk about that. But he can't physically show it because it wasn't actually filmed. They didn't film footage of the bodies sinking into the marsh. They didn't film footage of the tanks rolling over the bodies because it was too hard to move them out of the mud. They didn't film footage of soldiers having amputation taking place in the battlefield. They didn't film footage of soldiers with their lungs protruding out of their chest, breathing for the last time.
And is this contextualized at all?
There is narration. Narration provides these, like you hear voices talking about this from accounts, but you don't see any of the images. In fact, like the most disturbing images you see are still images of those amputations or of trench foot. And to be fair, when he colorizes that, there is something in seeing the muscle as pink and red and seeing it as black in a way that is effective. But the issue is that like he's drawing from this material, he can't depict the true horror of the First World War because that stuff wasn't shot. That footage doesn't exist at all because first of all, you couldn't bring the cameras over into No Man's Land because it was too heavy. And second of all, if you could, they would have burnt it as soon as it came back because there's no way you want anybody to see that at the time.
But this also happened in World War II, by the way. There was like a Filmmaker Project. There was a documentary made on it.
Was this?
That went to the concentration camps.
I was going to say,
it was released. The IFI had the documentary festival 2 or 3 years ago, and I saw it. And the footage is harrowing, but it was banned and it wasn't edited for quite a long time. It's really interesting. There's like a couple of famous filmmakers involved. Hitchcock was one of them.
Well, I know that one of Eisenhower's orders on finding the camps was that it should be documented.
He did, but I can't remember who the American filmmaker was offhand. I'd have to look up the documentary, but again, a similar thing, because, you know, it's like, do you want people to see this? And what are we filming for?
Yeah.
You know, and it's an interesting thing. And around war, the people that get to make these decisions might not be morally the best people to be making these decisions to some degree.
Yeah,
and that's
their agendas are not necessarily geared towards the historical record.
Yeah.
And I think that is an issue here. Like, he has to pick battles through the use of still images and sound effects and even computer effects of, like, so he has a photo of landscape and he has, like, shells going off and stuff exploding. And it's all very corny. It's like those old Doctor Who reconstructions and stuff like that. And that's the stuff that I object to. I think that the film...
I'm glad you object to something, though.
Oh, thank you. I do have some standards, Jay. Like, I admire it. I think it's ambitious, and there's a decision that is entirely in his wheelhouse that creates a problem as well, which is when he chooses to expand the vista and go into color. Because the film takes place in 3 acts. The first act is before the war, so soldiers being recruited, declaration of war, training. Middle section is the war itself, and final section, which is far too short, but is arguably the most interesting, is what happens after the soldiers come home. The opening and closing sections are basically shown as the footage exists.
Sure.
In the 4.3 aspect ratio, black and white. You know, there's been some restoration, but it's not...
He stretches them, does he?
He doesn't stretch those. He stretches
the middle, but he stretched it from 4.3 to...
Yes, he expands that. It's more of a zoom than a stretch, but yes. There's a moment when they go into the trenches where the screen literally parts and widens and color breaks forth, and it's a very effective, like, dramatic cinematic moment.
I think I've seen a clip of that, maybe.
But it's a moment that feels horribly ill-judged. It seems to suggest that the moment at which this thing becomes tangible, at the moment that these characters become real flesh and blood and take on the skin color and start making noise in the background of shots, is the moment in the heat of war. And that's not something that you should probably
They're
be
not
telling
real people until
they're in battle. And that's not necessarily the message that you want to be sending to Britain at this moment in time. No, entirely inadvertent. I don't doubt that Jackson's heart is in the right place.
Okay, no, I think that's fair enough.
And I suspect that it's a result of the fact that he did this and realized he needed an opening and closing segment.
Sure.
But it's something that is jarring, and it's sort of held the film back. It's fascinating. It's well worth a watch, just in terms of interest, but I don't think it entirely succeeds at what it wants to do. Very, very quickly, I'll talk through some other stuff that I saw. I saw Slender Man, the horror movie.
This bad, right?
It's pretty bad. It's
about 10 years late, really.
It is, exactly. It's 9 years after the character was created. The character's already descended into parody online. You have Splendor Man and Trender Man online. Madness. Trender Man, who wears a cardigan and hangs out at places, but he insists he was there before it was cool. Splendor Man, who just dresses in a bright colour sort of suit and costume and entertains small kids. So the internet has already begun making fun of Slender Man by the time the suits at Sony had figured out we want to make a horror movie about it. And that said, it's not awful it's not the worst film I've ever seen, which is low praise. But it's interesting in the way that it tries to take this internet native monster and make it a more traditional American style monster. And that it's a story. The Slender Man somehow hunts on the internet, but exists in like the woods of like Massachusetts. It's like he's somehow a pagan god connected with trees, but also he's sending messages to your phone. And there's this weird disconnect of like, you can tell it's like, well, he's on the internet, right? But we can just do like, it reminds
it's supernatural, isn't it?
Yeah,
you can send stuff to phones.
That's it. The wilderness, the great American wilderness.
Yeah,
it's
we'll
like
sort this out for us.
Yeah, that's it. We'll just say he's some sort of embodiment of that.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating, but not in a good way. It's not scary. It's not effective. It was clearly cut to ribbons. You can tell, particularly after the infamous case where the 2 girls stabbed one of their friends, which is covered in the documentary Beware the Slender Man, where they claimed that they were doing it to please the Slender Man. It's a fascinating documentary from HBO.
I heard mixed things about that.
Yeah, this is the thing where it's a very good telling of the story. It's not necessarily a very strong documentary in that it casts a very wide net, which is what you need when you're telling a story about this, because it's the internet and everything is connected. But it means that the documentary doesn't have a tight focus. Yeah, it's still a much better Slender Man movie than Slender Man. And then finally, and don't say I never do nothing for you guys.
Here we go.
I saw Faces Places.
Hey!
And it was the best movie that I've seen this week.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is excellent news.
This is faint praise, Ronan. You're not listening.
I enjoyed it. It's very charming.
But did you not watch something you loved this week too?
No. Have you not heard his films?
Oh, yeah. Panic Attack. Oh, okay. Maybe it's the second best movie I've seen this week.
No, can't take it back. No taxi backsies. Face Place is Darren's favourite film of the week, everybody.
Yeah, keep in mind that otherwise this week I saw Fantastic Beasts, The Girl in the Spider's Web, Bohemian Rhapsody. Okay.
Oh, don't ruin it.
Faces Places is wonderful. Tell us more.
I quite enjoyed it. It's very charming. It's best, as you might imagine, for a documentary about a filmmaker and an artist who works in photography and pasting. It's best when it's candid. Those wonderful conversations with people as they go into these communities and talk about it. I did find the documentary was a little bit BBC Two-ish in places, in that there's a lot of shots of the two of them when they're going to and it's very clearly sort of rehearsed and like it looks like it's after the fact, where they're coming into her kitchen and talking about, oh, where are we going to go today? And you almost expect like a sort of like a star wipe or something like that to come in. There's another sort of thing. There's a lot of shots of the two of them with their backs turned to the camera where they're talking, and it seems almost like you're dubbing over. It seems almost like you're doing this in post as opposed to capturing the moment, which is a shame, because when there are moments that are genuine, and particularly towards the end with her and what happens with her, that's very affecting. Yeah. But it does. I did.
Coward. Sorry, that's not you.
No,
sorry. That's
also
not,
me.
I don't want to spoil it.
In Verda's wonderful words, damn dirty rat.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I liked it. I liked it a lot. I did find some of the documentary stuff very like The Trip, and that's not an insult. I like The Trip, but I love
The Trip.
I really
The Trip's wonderful.
Yeah,
I know what you mean, and I think some of that stuff, not necessarily all, and not to be extremely defensive about it, is sort of knowing winking, sort of play, because it's very much playful around form.
She knows what she's doing.
Yeah,
like, she's I'm not for one moment pretending that Varda is an amateur. She knows exactly what she's doing. I'm more just talking about personal preference and stuff. In that,
absolutely.
And particularly because that contrasts so effectively with the moments of like candid, like expression.
No, that's fair, I think.
And even when you're talking to people, even when it's not just the two of them, the factory workers discussing what they're doing, for example, or the woman in the village, the waitress, with their poster on the wall with her kids and stuff like that. Like all that stuff is wonderful and very effective.
The shot of the port is amazing.
Yeah,
it's absolutely
with the three women. Yeah, with the three women. That is also lovely. Yeah.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
I wasn't quite as high in as Ronan. I really liked it, but I've subsequently watched a rake. It was my first Varda, and I've subsequently watched a rake load, and it wouldn't be as high up.
No, it's not as good as something like Gleaners and I, or they're a good
pushing 90 and still not going to documentary.
No,
good.
No, and it is, and she's an incredibly charming personality. JR's not bad either, but she's an amazingly charming personality.
And I think especially in this film, she's done it throughout her filmography, but what I really respond to here is her sort of ruminations on age and aging and vision, especially in this one.
Yeah.
And she's got some lovely POV shots of sort of her eyes failing her that I think is it's a combination of sad and funny. A lot of the time she finds humor in it, but there is also a desperate sadness. She cries a few times in the course of this, and it's very moving.
Yeah. All right then, so we'll move on to talk about the week in film news.
Oh yeah.
And big film news that we're all, I think, very, very excited about here in terms of international coverage.
We are.
We were very worried about Filmstruck.
Yes.
And there have been two pieces of good news. One, which is sort of good news, and one which I think is much better news. But Jay, do you want to discuss these two? First one is that Filmstruck is coming back, it turns out.
In an iteration, The Criterion are launching their own...
No, but isn't Filmstruck going to come back in its own thing and then
Criterion but it's Criterion. No, Criterion are doing their own
okay. Because I thought the Time Warner were doing their own version.
They are. Well, but I think what's happening, I don't think it's fully settled yet, but what my reading of it is that Criterion are going to launch their own kind of standalone in spring. And it's a completely new service. Like they're separating out. There's they're going to finish up Filmstruck, and that's it. Every subscribers are gone, so they're building from the ground up. Then in spring, my reading of it is towards the end of the year, where Time Warner are talking about a service.
Yes,
that this will become part of that service, and that they'll combine.
Okay,
now, that he can still keep it separate from what I read, but it's not 100% certain.
Because some of the stuff that I was reading, again, we're talking about he said, she said stuff, because a lot of the details are still in the
Yes, that's exactly it.
But the stuff that I was reading was suggesting that the Criterion would be launched without the Warner content. Because Warner
it's just Criterion.
That's it. And Warner
because it was Criterion and TCM and the Warner content all kind of bundled together at one point. Yeah. It started off with just TCM and
Criterion,
and then Warner's added a lot more of their own archive to it. But now it's just going to be Criterion. Now, if you've ever had a little wander around Filmstruck, the Criterion collection on its own is worth the money alone. It's a magnificent.
They include all the extras, the commentaries, the documentaries, the discussions.
It's immersive and comprehensive.
And by all accounts, they're going to carry those over as
well. Yes, I would think so.
Again,
there's no full details. I imagine the new year will start getting a bit more detail. I'm signing up, so it doesn't make a difference. Like I'm there first day.
And listeners, you too can get in on the ground floor because this elevator is only going up.
Yes, indeed. Well said,
but yes, so that's something to look forward to in the new year. Closer to home and more immediately, the Cork Film Festival.
It's not still going, is it?
Which seems to have been running for an
Forever.
eternity, which is great. More power to them. And we talked about this. This is because they run over weekends, which is a very canny strategy.
It was being funny. It is a good idea.
It is a great idea, and it means that people can go down from other places and enjoy them down there. But they announced their winners for the film festival this year. So they have the audience award was won by Float Like a Butterfly.
I can't wait to see this. I'm a huge Carmen Winters fan, and if you haven't seen Snap, you should see Snap. I think it's on Volta, Ronan, if you haven't seen it.
I haven't.
And you have the Volta thing, which
you
may
indeed
have.
There you go.
Snap
That's
is well
decided.
worth seeing.
Okay. The Cork Film Festival short film candidate for the 2019 European Film Awards, which is quite a title, went to Black Sheep, directed by Ed Perkins as well.
Very good.
The festival's second Academy Awards qualifying short was Maria Eckerson's Schoolhouse Blues. And I'm not going to try to pronounce that in there, but it's a Swedish short, which the judges recognized for being, and I quote, both uplifting and heartbreaking, and prompts us to consider continuity and change, the struggle for survival on the margins, and the enduring and potential restorative power of love.
Some of my favorite things to consider.
Indeed.
But yeah, so it's quite a lineup there.
There was also, I think, the inaugural Best Director award went to Una Kearney, a Cork woman who I haven't seen the latest film that she was awarded for, considering it just premiered at that festival, which I was not at. But my first experience with Kearney's work was Wonder House at the Cork Film Festival back in 2012, which is still this terribly underseen but really strange documentary feature about childhood and imagination filtered through this weird visualization of a girl walking through a castle. It's terrific if you get the chance to see it. So I'll be looking at this very eagerly.
And saving the best for last, the Grand Prix Irish Short Award at the 63rd Cork Film Festival Awards. And every time I say 63rd Cork Film Festival Awards, it's amazing.
63, yeah. It's one of the oldest in Europe.
That's astounding. But the prize went to Stigma. Okay, all right then.
Do we know Stigma?
Stigma was directed by Helen Warner and produced by Mary MacDonald. And I don't have any other details. It tells the story of how a string of confessions unveil a tale of religious guilt, sin, and redemption, and possesses a storytelling and visual sophistication that left a distinct impression on the jury.
Excellent.
Congratulations.
I'm sure it'll be turned up at some short film festivals.
We'll be talking about it in no time at all.
Yep.
And closer to home again, the Screen Skills Ireland launched the Careers in Screen portal. So if you are looking to branch out, or if you are a professional looking to get a career or develop a career in film, that portal is available. The links are on Scannain. It's Screen Training Ireland. The news came at the inaugural Screen Skills Industry Education Forum.
That seems a bit of a mouthful, right?
It is, and it's not a great acronym either, because it's CSEF. Which took place in Dublin on November the 19th. It's a dedicated space that outlines the broad range of job roles available in the screen industry in Ireland and directs you to the most appropriate routes to that role.
Yeah, it seems like a good idea in theory. See how it shakes out in practice.
It is, in particular, because the Irish industry, as we've discussed, it's a very daunting environment to break into in some places. So it's nice to have that path laid out. And that
very much so.
More immediately, if you are interested in Polish film, and based on what we talked about in the top 10 over recent weeks, it seems there's a very large contingent of listeners who may be interested in Polish film. The 13th annual IFI and Kinopolis Polish Film Festival will be taking place from December 6th to 9th.
Like I haven't got enough to see this year.
I know. It's the weekend after this one, so you can still get in there ahead of the curve.
Okay.
The festival kicks off with a screening of the warm comedy A Cat with a Dog from director Janusz Kondrak, and I apologize to Mr. Kondratik for that. But yeah, and it's also delighted to welcome, and I apologize for this in advance, director Malgorzata Sumoska to present her latest film, Mug, on Saturday the 8th.
You should have just said Mug.
Yes,
the director of Mug.
The director of Mug will be there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's Panic Attack will also be there, which is not the film that we were discussing. Unfortunately,
I'm sure the other Panic Attack is good too.
Ogla Chadaz's debut feature Nina which is a story of love and identity about a woman unable to bear children who's searching for a surrogate. That's also screening there. Ether is screening there, and there's a whole host of stuff there. They've got, because of marking the death of Peter Zulkin, they're screening The War of the Worlds, Next Century, which is a reworking of the H.G. Wells novel.
Okay.
Yeah, not familiar with his work, but apparently kind of a big name in Polish sci-fi cinema. So I'm really particularly keen to check that out. But there's a lot of really good new stuff there, so I'm going to try to catch as many as I can.
Sci-fi's pretty good for that in their seasons.
They're
They're
really good at shining a light on things that don't otherwise get it.
And before we go, just worth signaling that the animated shorts program will be on the Saturday lunchtime slot, or Sunday lunchtime slot.
Okay.
So if you are interested, that's something worth seeking out.
Eastern European animation is always worth checking out. Always tremendous fun.
We talked a little bit last week about the Irish Film in London Awards, which take place actually before the festival that they screen.
Madness.
Which is an interesting. It's I don't want to say, when I say it's an interesting approach, that sounds condescending, but it is an interesting approach to take in terms of like structuring your film festival. Yeah. Because it means you open with a bang, in a sense. But that's taking place at the moment, and it will be taking place, I think, for the next week or so. Screenings include Smithy and Dickey, Under the Clock, which is the documentary about Clearys, which I've seen a lot of ads for. But
this is one of these there's this being kind of little mini genre of documentaries around, Dublin meet me folklore. At the cinema, kind of the Irish pub, these kind of things. It's quite
digging into the minutiae of
fun, I guess is the word for it.
I've seen Smithy and Dickey, actually. I think I saw it at the Flat. It's really cute and nice.
Cool. Other screenings taking place will be The Little Stranger will be screening there, interestingly enough.
I love The Little Stranger.
And
really good.
I think it could have done to be A Little Stranger. And the closing film will be We Ourselves, starring Aidan Gillen.
Oh, I've seen that. That's the one that was showed in Savoy.
Paul Mercier's second
really,
feature.
Really
the one
good.
You recommended.
Yes,
this is the one.
This is my top 20 of the year. It's kind of lodged itself in there. It's really good.
So all you have to do, listeners, is just travel to London, and you can see it on the big
Or you
screen.
can read my review on Scannain.
I mean, they're practically the same thing, really.
But I mean, it's like just close your eyes and you're there.
Yeah.
But it's good. Well worth seeing.
A podcast extra will be Jay reading it aloud, so you can literally close your eyes and feel like you are there.
God help you all.
Speaking of experiences you might want to close your eyes for, Vico Nicesi's feature debut, Cellar Door, a horror film, is hitting Irish cinemas on January 25th, which I believe a couple of people may have seen at the Fla this year.
I did not.
No, you did not?
I know Niall saw it.
This is one of those, and we talked about this, there's a strange found footage, sort of Magdalene Laundry subgenre. That seems to
two of them sprung up at the Fly. I can't remember the name of the one I saw, but it was dreadful.
That was the one with Roddy Lawler, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And I feel sorry that's what I remember from that.
Yeah, I don't think the other one went over with some people as well as did with others, but yeah, we'll see. It's a tricky business. It's a tricky line to walk.
I think it's good that we start exploring this in art. It's important, and it has been done well before.
Yes.
I haven't seen this one. Maybe it's great. The other one, which I can't for the life of me remember the name, I'm sorry. It was just used for genre trappings, and I think that is kind of deplorable.
All right, let's run very quickly through the top 10. Woo-hoo! At number 10, it's Overlord.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I probably won't at this stage.
Better when it's Captain America the First Avenger as a horror movie, and not so good when it's just Captain America the First Avenger on a lower budget.
Okay.
It could be pulpy, it could be fun. It ends up being neither.
We have discussed before, though, how you're wrong about Captain America the First Avenger.
We have, and I remember how that ended. I think I won. At number 9, it's Johnny English Strikes Again.
Oh, God, still here.
He sure does.
And he's still there. Do you want to guess how much he's earned at the Irish box office today?
Far too much.
Great deal, 3 billion.
I'm going to say 1.8 million.
This is why we're amazed that Ronan has seen 2 films in the top 10. And we haven't hit one yet.
Has he yet paid for the Brexit divorce bill?
Very good.
This is an interesting one. At number 8, I missed this coming out. This is the BTS film, Burn the Stage, the movie.
What?
What's that?
BTS, the Korean boy band. Is it Korean or Japanese?
You said that like you would ever
either
expect me to know.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
They're usually popular with the kids. They're like an
Darren, look at me. Why would I know this?
One Direction. They're like a phenomenon. They're cuddly, they're cute, they're friendly, they're memeable.
And they're over here.
And they're in cinemas right now as we speak. Placing number 8.
Wow.
This is, okay.
The world is a strange place.
I didn't know that BTS stood for Burn the Stage.
I would have said something
Maybe
else.
it doesn't. It's just a clever
Because it
twist.
seems like a very aggressive title for those very nice young men.
We're going to go with that.
At number 7, it's Smallfoot.
Yeah.
Niall still recommends this
I
from afar.
I may get this weekend as I'm babysitting duties.
This has earned less than Johnny English Strikes Again.
People are insane.
Oh.
People are absolutely mad. I don't understand it. But
A Smallfoot fan has just tried to burst into the studio.
At number 6, it's Nutcracker and the Four Realms. Luke Dunn of this parish occasionally has seen this movie, and he has promised us a full 40 minutes on it next week.
Oh, Lord.
Please, not 40 minutes. Luke, what are you doing?
I'm very
I can't wait
excited
either.
about this.
Luke comes up with theories and insights that are remarkable. And I can't wait for it.
Remarkable is the word.
I think it's going to be a tough nut to crack.
Indeed.
Hey.
At number 5, disappointingly, it's Widows. Why does this not do better?
How much do you make?
Because I haven't gone to see it yet. I'm sorry.
It has made so far €384,000 at the box office, which
okay.
is okay.
That's respectable.
It opened very low at the American box office as well. This is where, this is where we're talking about like the monsters dominating the season. Stuff like, and we're going to get to them much higher up. And I believe Ronan has seen both of the monsters dominating this season.
I haven't. Indeed. I've
Widows
done my homework.
Couldn't get a breath. A C+ cinema score in the States, which is a death knell for word of mouth.
Who are these people that look at cinema score?
I don't know if they look at cinema score. I think it's more
It's just more
indicative
okay.
of like how people are reacting to it.
People are weird.
Which is very, very strange because it's one of my favorite films.
I know. I'm looking forward to it. I'm somehow got to squeeze in one day this year. Oh, good Lord. I don't have a day to myself. It's exhausting.
And yet somehow he's going to find time to watch Cliffhanger again.
And he finds time to be here for us. Isn't
Yeah,
that
that's what matters.
I care. That's the problem.
At number 4, I think we may have somebody on the podcast who has seen this movie for the first time this week. It's A Star Is Born.
Hang on, I'm just going to get my popcorn. Go ahead, Ronan.
So, Ronan.
No, there's no popcorn chomping here. Look.
That was a great segue. I really, really believe that there's...
This is one of those fascinating situations where I find myself sort of screaming at the sky. I was really excited to go see this. You may or may not believe that to be true.
I don't know.
No, because it was one of those things where I sort of didn't have too much interest. I was kind of acutely aware of its coming out because it had been a Clint Eastwood project for so many years, and then when I was told Bradley Cooper was taking over, there goes my interest. But the reviews were very good. You all sort of had some interesting conversations. Even those of you who didn't particularly like it made it sound really fascinating to me. So I went with high expectations, really hoping I'd like it. And almost immediately they tumbled because Bradley Cooper cannot direct. And I'm sorry, point me to one scene where he does something decent with the direction other than, not dropping the camera and surprising us all.
I would genuinely argue that even like the little shallow scene, it's very conventional. It's clear that he's watched a lot of 70s movies. He's very heavily influenced by New Hollywood. In particular, very influenced by Clint Eastwood, appropriately enough. There's a lot of those long takes and stuff. But I think the sequence where, and again, this is as somebody who is in the paradoxical Last Jedi situation of not particularly caring for a Star
find
Is Born,
yourself defending
but
it.
somehow being the person in the room arguing for it. But the sequence where Lady Gaga performs Shallow for the first time with the camera going out on stage and moving around her, you could argue that Gaga's persona is enough, but I think the way that the shooting is handled, I think it's a huge part of the moment. I think it's beautifully directed.
Okay.
I think Cooper's a much better director than he is a writer or an actor.
With that, I agree, but I do not rate him as a director at all. See, I think in that moment, and I think I should be clear here, I don't think it's terrible direction, but I don't think there is anything to justify the kind of praise he has got for it, where people say, wow, Bradley Cooper really can direct. I think he can do passable things, and often he's probably working in collaboration with a cinematographer and a camera team who have brought their experience to bear, because there are several very poor directorial choices here. And this is the hill I will die on.
Well, there's the very weird choice where Sam Elliott comes out of the
that shot
sound
is
booth,
follows
him
bad.
through a ridiculously long take, because long takes are what good directors
hops
do.
Up onto the
and
stage, wheels around, does the whole thing.
And then
there is no
down,
reason
and then
for
suddenly cuts in the
any
middle
this.
of a sentence as well, which is a very strange place to end a long take.
Yeah.
And I say that quite liking the rest of the direction of the film.
There's no justification for it whatsoever. I think, and I say my sort of expectations plummeted immediately because I think Cooper introduces his character very badly. He introduces him in the middle of a concert, and this is the point where we're supposed to understand his character, and his character is very, very much the figure on which the entire film is hung. He's very badly introduced. There is no sense of who this man is as a performer because the camera is next to him on the stage the whole time. You get no sense of what it might be like to be in that crowd, who he is to that crowd. No representation of his persona or of his music. So I wound up not having the basis for the rest of the film where you need to believe that somebody of this stature could create a star of her stature. I didn't buy it at any point. Also didn't buy the relationship.
He's authentic. And he's real.
Because he's gravelly.
Because he stands on stage with a guitar like a performer. And it's okay that he steals other people's voices / movies / screenplay ideas / directorial choices. Yeah. Because he's got something to fucking say.
There is a terrific line in Richard Brody's review. It's the first line of his review where he says, the true love story in A Star is Born is that between Bradley Cooper, the director, and Bradley Cooper, the star. And that is nail hammered onto head.
I think that's very true. I think that's the issue. This is the first version of A Star is Born where it's being pushed behind the scenes and in front of the camera towards the dying star. It's the first Star is Born movie that's like, does a star really have to be born? Can't we just have the star that's in decline and just talk about how awesome and authentic and real
and I think that's an enormous problem because it could be so much more. That scene you mentioned, and I think fair enough there, the camera work isn't doing any harm there, but I think from my perspective it is Lady Gaga. It's because she carries that song so well and it's very, very perfectly suited to her voice. And everything this film does right, when it does things right, is around her. When she's singing, when she's performing, because she is an incredible presence. And I'm no fan of her music. I couldn't name 3 songs, but she carries the film when it is.
I agree with that.
The only issue with that is that the film seems openly contemptuous of her.
No, absolutely. And I think...
I mean, there's a moment where she shows up wearing a shirt that says, oh, 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 and he's like, I thought you might find this song I wrote for you when you got back to yourself. Or, I thought maybe this could be more authentic. You singing these words that I, a man, wrote for you to sing about me. That's the major
flaw in the film. I don't mind that the character played by Bradley Cooper thinks what he does is macho and real and whatever.
No,
and what
she does as well.
But the film and the director does as well is where the problem lies.
There's the moment where Gaga looks at, or the character played by Gaga looks at herself being made up in the style of Lady Gaga and says, that doesn't look like me. And it feels like, and again, and I don't think Gaga's being victimized or marginalized. But no. Gaga's playing entirely. This is Gaga's persona. Like her last album, and I know you're not a big Gaga fan. I suspect I'm not a big Gaga fan, but somehow I find myself in the position of being the biggest Gaga fan.
Good man.
But her last album, Joanne, is very consciously aimed at recruiting a rock audience. Yep. And it's called Joanne because that's her name, because she's shedding the Gaga persona. Okay. She recorded with Tony Bennett a little bit beforehand. This is very much like this. This suits Gaga's narrative as much as it suits.
No, absolutely. And I think
she's shedding.
She is never allowing herself to be used as the film tries consistently to use her, which is to her great credit. She turns in a really good performance.
I agree.
And she gets I think I would detest this film if it were not for her, because she really lifts it up. There's a point at the end where she's giving an absolutely rousing performance. It's like it's very clear to everyone that I did not like this film. I was almost in tears. Her performance is so good at that point. The very end where she has that sort of operatic stage.
But it's okay.
And then it cuts to Bradley Cooper performing the same song. And I'm sorry, I find it hard to believe that even if you've bought into this relationship, which I absolutely had not, that you would find that moment anything other than skin-crawlingly wrong.
No, people found it really sad. I've gone to the cinema. I've seen this 4 times now.
I heard people weeping.
People were weeping beside me. People I went with were weeping.
I didn't believe he wrote the song. I've said this before.
No, exactly.
I don't believe he could write that song.
He absolutely did write that song. That song is You Will Never Love Anybody But Me.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the thing, is that, it's a love song to himself that he's speaking through this young star that he's raised. And it's really, really creepy.
It is.
It's like, it's a song about how she will never love anybody but him. And he's marketing it as her return to authenticity. Yeah. Like, the most authentic that this woman...
And he's returned her.
Yeah, but that's the thing. The most authentic that this woman can be is when she's singing lyrics that were written for her by somebody else.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the problem. And Cooper does that kind of thing throughout the film. It's really interesting the way that he shoots her. There are, I think, I'm open to correction on this, I think there are 4 POV shots in this of her face from his perspective. And you get each time a return shot that is over her shoulder. So it is consistently, the film is gazing at her from Cooper's perspective, never literally giving you her perspective. And that feels like the perfect summation of what's going on. It is Cooper through and through, and she is, she is an object of his gaze and of his story all the time. And his story is so much less interesting because he's a trashy character. How he can understand that and not back up his viewpoint is mind-boggling.
Yeah, I know.
That said, we do get the wonderful moment where he's at a pharmacological conference, smashing pills with his boot and snorting them through, which is, I chuckled at that. I felt really bad because nobody else in the cinema laughed.
I laughed several times, and I was the only one in many of them. But that moment where it cuts from her to him, I burst out laughing. I couldn't control myself, and I apologise to everyone in the cinema because I hate when people do that, but it is comically bad.
They just thought that you were crying so hard.
I was. That's enough Ronan cranky at musicals for 1 week, right?
That's what we're thinking. But, so at number 3, you went to see Bohemian Rhapsody.
I'll get the rest of my popcorn.
Yeah.
Would you get me a top up there?
Relativity is really important in films, so let me say that I really loved A Star Is Born. Oh, Bohemian Rhapsody. Okay, so... back to what I said earlier about Call Me By Your Name and the idea of tragic narratives finally being reclaimed queer tragic narratives, rather, finally being reclaimed. Bohemian Rhapsody is first and foremost really bad in almost every aspect. It's poorly directed by a singer for the most part, who apparently was just a maniac on set.
When he was on set.
I should say Rami Malek gives a good performance. And he
wore those teeth for a year. And he now has them gilded.
He what?
He got them plated in gold and put on a shelf right next to what he hopes will be his Oscar.
I don't see that happening.
I don't see that happening either, but I can see a nomination.
Yeah, possibly. His performance is the best thing in the film, which is not really saying much at all, but he does something really interesting about portraying Mercury through this sort of prism of performativity, which I think is where the film sometimes kind of gets close. It's sort of doing something interesting with his legacy. Problem is it's terribly written, so it robs him of that at every single moment. I can't remember the name of the scriptwriter because I try not to. Anthony McCartan, who also this year gave us the gift of Darkest Hour.
And The Theory of Everything. He's a 2-time Oscar nominee.
Good
possibly
Jesus,
soon to be a 3-time Oscar
films.
nominee. This film is a biography of a figure with troubling issues that made a lot of money at the box office. And I would not be surprised to see this getting a lot of love.
Not to mention his previous films have both won Best Actor.
Yeah.
So Malik is very likely to be in there, and he almost kind of deserves to be there. So in terms of a sort of by the numbers musical biopic, it falls down repeatedly because it has that really, really weird conception of these light bulb moments where, history rarely feels in the moment to have the kind of weight it later accrues, and every time he has people sort of looking off into the middle distance going, my God, I've got it, in moments where that never happened, in a way that Churchill repeatedly does in fucking Subways.
There's a moment where he's writing lyrics down. He pauses, leans back in the rocking chair, smiles to himself and says, that's really quite good, nods, and continues writing.
Yeah, it is that kind of nonsense. It is.
He walks over a farm at one point, looks over the pastoral hills, and hears the slow piano keys of Bohemian Rhapsody rising in the background as if summoned by destiny.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
It is not good in any way, and it's not enjoyably daft at any point.
You're waiting for the moment where he tries to get into a nightclub and bouncer's like, oh, I see a little silhouette of a man. Like, the film doesn't go there, but you're so close.
It practically does. It just doesn't have the wit to do that. You could have done something funny and strange with this. They don't do either of those things. And it's kind of concerning that 2 of the surviving members of the band are in here and regularly make Mercury look bad at their expense.
Not only that, they make themselves look good. There's a moment where Brian May is introduced.
They're extremely wholesome.
Freddie Mercury's like, so you studied astrophysics. I guess that makes you the smart one. And Brian May, producer of the film, says, yes, it does. And there's a moment where Roger's like, I could be busy having sex right now. And there's a lot of that.
Instead, I'm such a good man. It's dreck, and even in the moments of the sort of jukebox musical thing that it's going for, it's, you're much better off listening to the greatest hits.
I quite like the Live Aid sequences. I will concede they're a wonderful approximation.
Good Lord, it drags.
Really? I thought they were the moment where
it recreates the entire thing, and I mean that's why most people are there. That's why it's been a huge success. So it makes a lot of sense for it to be there, and it's not as bad as the stuff that is scripted.
That's it exactly. And it's also arguably a synthesis of the whole concert cinema experience that people are going for. Like, I wouldn't be surprised to see a Live Aid film that is, like all of Live Aid just dramatized at some stage in the near future. I can see Jay's skin trying
recoiling.
But this sounds absolutely appalling.
It's terrible. At the point of the Live Aid sequence, I just desperately wanted to get out of the cinema. I was sort of unwillingly dragged to this because I didn't really want to see it. Went to see it with a number of people. I think one was kind of enthusiastically fond of it. The rest, not so much. I disliked it quite strongly, and it only grew on me thinking about it more and more, which I've done sort of to the detriment of my mental health over the last week or so since I've seen it. I should stop thinking about this. But it's really annoying because, as terrible as it is, and it's terrible, it's very badly made, there's enough in it to be enjoyable to Queen fans if it wasn't for this sort of insidious moralizing that I think I will get and have got already accusations of digging too deep into this thing. But I'm sorry, this is the reality of the thing.
Yeah.
The way a film presents characters in all their depths fundamentally has something to say about that and has judgments to make. Whether you want to ignore them or not and just enjoy the fun of the film, that's fine. But you cannot pretend that these things are not there and that they have an effect. And in the context of what I'm saying about Call Me By Your Name and tragic queer narratives and reclaiming them, Freddie Mercury is one of the great examples of sort of this straddler of pop culture and gay culture.
Yeah.
Sort of interesting thing during his lifetime that it was like, is he out, is he not? There was, it was very much an open secret and much discussed at the time. The film has this very peculiar judgment of him where it acknowledges his sexuality and doesn't on the surface appear to have any issue with that, except everything is shot in this sort of seedy cruising style, dark, dingy leather clubs. And it tries to have it both ways, where it goes like, ooh, look at this sort of seedy, leathery stuff going on. But also, very much. But also has the thing of, ooh, look at his stage persona with all the leather. It's like, isn't it brilliant that he had this? Ooh, where he got it from was awful.
So it's like Daily Mail.
It is
the world
absolutely like that. And I think it's really troubling that it focuses on and this is true to life, but it focuses on his heterosexual relationship that he had early in life and they carried on into a platonic sort of long-term common law marriage. But also that the one queer relationship it allows him to have with Jim Hutton, his real-life partner of, I think, about 8 years,
it's
explicitly desexualizes. There, the introduction they have, the first line they speak to each other is this sort of erection of a physical barrier where he says, "Do not touch me." They get to share a very sort of curt kiss at one point, and that is it. And the film explicitly, postulates this figure as somebody that it is desirable for him to be with, a sort of desexualized husband that he
bring
can
him
potentially
home to
go
your
off.
parents,
And
quite literally.
Exactly. And everything else is off to the side as something fundamentally undesirable. And that sort of thing is just so very, very, very wrong. And so subtle that that kind of thing creeping into a film that's being seen by as many people is profoundly damaging.
Yep. Yeah. This is going to be the highest grossing music biopic of all time. I will just add two things there, one of which is more damning than what you were saying, and one which is perhaps I'm a little more sympathetic to. The one that's more damning is the fact that the movie makes a big deal of his AIDS diagnosis.
Sure.
But it does that by moving the AIDS diagnosis back.
And using it as a convenient little
plot point.
plot point.
A convenient plot point. In that, like, you were talking about how like the narratives that you tell are important and stuff like that, even when you don't think they are. But this is something the film thought was so consciously important that it moved back in. It actually changed the chronology. The point where, like, Mercury didn't get his AIDS diagnosis until 2 years after Live Aid. He didn't tell the band until 2 years after that. He was in a sexual relationship with Hutton for several years before he got his diagnosis. But the moving of that back explicitly, as you point out, desexualizes them. And that's contrasted, as you point out, with that sequence in the gay club, in like the sort of the leather sort of fetish sort of thing.
Yep.
And the other thing is that I wonder if this is just and while that's a horrible decision that has those horrible implications, it also feels like it's a result of thoughtlessness in that we talked on the podcast before about the Dewey Cox story. And I think that it's following the Dewey Cox template through and through. Yeah. The only issue is that, like, when it comes to that, it opens with the sequence of hey, Freddie, Freddie Mercury has to remember his whole life before he plays any concert. Quite literally. Like, that's the entire premise of the film. Yeah. And it ends up with his actual gay sexuality being treated as equivalent to those scenes in Walk Hard, where it's like, you don't want any of this gay sex, Freddie.
Yeah.
You don't want to know 100%. What's going on behind that door. But it's really, really, really. So,
do you think he did it almost inadvertent?
Well, that's the thing. Like, a part of me wonders, like, a lot of the decisions are conscious, but a lot of them also seem like autopilot biopic decisions, where it's like, we need a crisis, and his sexuality has to be that crisis without anybody sticking their hand up and going,
And the thing is, there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that this was a sort of question of identity that must have been very difficult for him and informed a lot of his writing and a lot of his life, a lot of his performance. His queerness is inseparable from his status as an artist. I don't doubt that there is tension there. The tension is exploited in completely the wrong way. And it's done in such a way that you get this thing in the end where, talking in the context of mainstream depictions of queerness, it is all right for us now to have gay love. We cannot have gay sex. That is the fundamental implication of this film, whether intentional or not. That is wrong and very, very bad.
Yeah. And it's absurd. It is really, really absurd. And it happens throughout. It's the weirdness of a PG-13 Queen film, but the irony of a PG-13, the double standards that we talked about. Where, the portrayal of heterosexual... Like, the relationship that he has with Mary is allowed to be surprisingly tactile and physical, but you couldn't get away with that with
and there are specifically sexualized gazes of her from his perspective. It is just
He's on top of her at one point. He's kissing her, he's touching her, he's stroking her, but he can't touch a male lover in that way.
And the film, I know, getting into the accusation of reading too much into it, but the film explicitly has his hand slapped away when he does that to a man.
Yeah. And I don't think you're reading too much into it.
No, but it is. So. And I think, the question of whether or not this is intentional, I don't think anybody's setting out to sort of create this binary between, gay sex and gay love. But it is falling back on the attitudes that already exist, that many queer films in the last years have made strides toward erasing, and this is very much several steps back.
Yeah. I will point to, and I think you pointed me to this, so this is actually something that I should credit to you, but Peter
Knightsburt in a piece in CBS Arts, which he's very, very, very annoyed about it, and rightly so. He's one of the sort of really, really great queer cinema critics out there, been doing great work in IndieWire and a number of other places for a couple of years. He's got a really sort of deep dive piece on it that gets a little more, I have to say I don't know much about Queen or Freddie Mercury at all. Peter dives much more deeply.
Don't worry, none of the writers of the film did either.
That's true. Peter dives much more deeply into the sort of historical inaccuracies and the implications of that, and it's a really good piece while we're checking out CBS Arts. One other thing I will say, just before I forget, I sort of furiously did a little bit of research about this and came across a Hollywood Reporter clip from Writers' Roundtables from last year, when Darkest Hour was potentially... Did it get nominated for Best Script?
It did. He's a 2-time Oscar nominee.
Oy.
Soon possibly to be a 3-time Oscar nominee.
Script.
Our dear friend Anthony McCartan, the biggest hack I've ever known.
Whoa, okay.
You're welcome on the podcast to defend yourself. Come on, Anthony. It'll be fun. No, I'm sorry. I can't put up with this sort of thing, and this angers me, as you may have heard. He has a line in that roundtable that made me burst out laughing aloud, which I've done a lot this week in all the wrong ways. He said there is a very thin line between artistic license and artistic licentiousness. Yes, there is.
At number 2, and appropriate enough because you've been a mean one, Mr. Doyle, it's The Grinch. Which is,
this will go on for weeks and weeks anyway.
This will go on. We'll be talking about this come Christmas. Oh, yeah. No. This will be running at least through Christmas.
Oh, absolutely.
And apparently it's perfectly fine, which is like damning with the faintest of praise.
I'd almost go to see it if it wasn't for Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah,
really?
Same.
I can't stand his voice.
He's terrible.
I don't mind Cumberbatch.
I don't mind him, but his voice, there's something about his voice, and his voice for a whole film. And just,
I just don't get it.
Okay.
Why?
Really?
Sorry. Yeah, why?
Why?
Yeah. Why, Darren?
Because it's 1.13 million euro.
No, why him?
Why? Well, because he's got a very big fandom on the internet.
Oh, God,
people like
this.
it.
I've told you about the internet and the problems.
He's very tall.
He is very tall.
And he did stop a mugger.
What?
you not hear this story? He was traveling. He was, I think it was the filming of Patrick Melrose, but he was traveling from the airport in a taxi, and he saw somebody on a bike being assaulted. Hopped down the taxi, wrestled the mugger to the ground, and returned the guy's property that had been stolen from him. This was by Baker Street.
I don't want to be cynical, right?
No.
But I almost never believe those stories of celebrity in a rescue somebody from the car.
What's that famous one of somebody being pulled out of a burning wreck? And I can't remember who it turned out to be.
No, but it doesn't matter. It's not true. None of it's true. It's all lies.
Okay, Cumberbatch seems like a perfectly nice person. My favorite Cumberbatch moment is when he got asked what his opinion was about his fans calling themselves Cumber bitches, and his response was, "I prefer to think of them as Cumber people." And I was like, "That's a very classy way of handling it. That isn't
vomit emoji."
Okay, fine.
Sorry.
All right. At number 1, Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald.
This is getting absolutely hammered by critics.
Critically, and it's also the lowest grossing Harry Potter film, although it will still gross enough that it will produce countless sequels.
F you, Johnny Depp, that's what I say.
It's
replacing our Mr. Farrell.
Shoddily made film in every sense, and it's really weird its sense of priorities. There are, like, the editing in this is atrocious, and you can tell, like, characters who are in one place and then you cut to the same scene where they're standing somewhere else. There's a moment where they're hiding on top of library sort of stacks, and the next cut it cuts to a monster, and the next cut of them is on the ground running away, and you can tell that, like, the instruction while editing this movie, which is 2 hours and 20 minutes long, was that we need to make enough room for all the exposition. So you need to cut these action sequences as tight as humanly possible, we can cram more speech into this. This is one of the most striking thing about Fantastic Beasts is that, as far as it's concerned, the climax of the movie is not the special effects sequence where Johnny Depp hurls blue fire at people. That would be an issue of itself. The climactic sequence is a moment where 8 members of the lead cast stand together inside a crypt, open a book that portrays a family tree, and work their way through the branches one at a time, building to a startling revelation that also leads to a startling revelation that nobody knew anything about going in. It's a very, very confusing film. It's very much inside baseball. It doesn't really work.
I talked to a couple of people this week who would have been relative fans of the first one. One was a big fan, one was so-so. And both of them thought this was utterly dreck.
Yeah, but I mean, on the other
hand, they'd be Harry Potter fans. They'd kind of like this one, but apparently this is the red line.
And I did talk about this a little bit when I sort of, when it was last week. Kids do seem to genuinely love it. I came out in the cinema and kids were talking to their parents about how much they loved it. All right, so let's talk about the new releases out this week.
Oh God, are we still here? Yeah, okay, go on, hit me.
Robin Hood.
Oh God, this is getting absolutely...
Taron Egerton, Jamie Foxx, Jamie Dornan, Ben Mendelsohn.
I saw the trailer for this when I went to see Bo Rap and spent the entire thing being like, what the hell is this? Is there a new Assassin's Creed? What on earth? And then it came up Robin.
Somebody watched Arrow or thought that Hawkeye from the Avengers should have a movie and it should be set in the Middle Ages. Because it's very much, it's like Britain's original superhero. That's the trailer tagline. And it's like, dudes, just don't make a Hawkeye movie, but don't make this either.
Yeah.
Donald Clark's review is very funny.
Magnificently salty.
Yeah, it is. He was not a fan.
Armpit-wavingly bad, I believe.
Yeah, but the full review to follow, and the full review is a good hoot.
He expanded that armpit wave to a lot of good words.
Yeah, it was funny.
Also out this week, Nativity Rocks is out.
Is this like the sixth of these?
Yeah,
this is...
I have not seen a one.
This Ain't No Silent Night, Ronan, starring Celia Emery, who we like, Anna Chancellor, who we also like, Helen George, who I don't know, and Ruth Jones, who I do like. So yeah, that's
I have never seen one of these films.
I heard the first few were actually quite good, but now 12. It's just a sort of...
They're just cashing in.
It's shaking them by the ankles. Celia Marie is great.
Yeah, she is
we
great.
wish her well.
Fantastic.
Who is she again?
She's the one who tried to sell you on going to the cinema to see Finding Your Feet.
Most importantly of all, she is the teacher in When I Kissed the Teacher.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
With her mad Scottish accent.
She's great.
What a baddie!
Yeah.
She's glorious.
She is fantastic in everything she's in. She's also one of those great supporting actors who's turned up in absolutely everything.
She's tremendous.
Great.
Always.
Also out, Tyler Perry's Nobody's Fool.
Is it Christmas themed?
I don't know.
A woman who is released from prison and reunites with her sister discovers she is in an online relationship with a man who may be catfishing her. So I think not. Starring Missy Pyle, Tiffany Haddish, and Whoopi Goldberg.
Oh, I could see Whoopi back.
And we're sold. All right. Also at this week, Serenity, written and directed by Stephen Knight, who's a writer who's been doing a lot of work. Yep. No, is that
That's
Stephen
D. Knight.
No.
Is the same people?
Okay.
I
But
don't know
Stephen
anything
D.
about
Knight is the guy who did Spartacus, Blood and Sand, and the first season of Daredevil,
then
aka
that
the
wouldn't
good
be the
season
same
of Daredevil. Yeah, he's not the guy who did Locke.
I've no interest now. I'm out.
So this is the one with Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway, Diane Lane, and Jason Clarke. A mysterious past of a fishing boat captain living in the Caribbean comes back to haunt him, ensnaring his life in a new reality that may not be what it seems.
Yeah, no.
No reality is ever what it seems. Stop it.
Indeed.
Shoplifters is out this week as well. Corrida's one, which I was not particularly moved by, but that's because I have no heart. Graham really liked it.
I've no heart either, apparently, because I'm not a massive Corrida fan in any way, shape, or form. So I will probably get to this in 2020, maybe. I have too much to watch. I will get to it.
It's a Fast and Furious film directed by Mike Leigh.
Oh God! Please
Tell me
don't,
that's
not Tokyo Drift, thankfully.
Also out this week, Student of the Year 2.
What
was Student of the Year?
It's a Bollywood film.
Oh.
So yeah, Pokemon movie The Power of Us is also out.
Next.
Okay, and then finally, we're going to get to the big releases of the week. Are you ready for the big
more?
guns?
I don't know.
The Camino Voyage.
Oh,
yes.
yes.
You guys may
Glenn
have seen.
answered both things.
The Glenn answered both things.
Pretty much.
I haven't seen. I've heard decent enough things.
Yes, I've heard good reviews online from people. All right, fine. In that case, Assassination Nation is being released.
I don't know what this is.
Which is the one about those pesky millennials. Town's small secrets are threatened to be unveiled online unless chaos is allowed to reign.
Via avocado brunches.
That's it exactly.
Speaking as a millennial, we are very pesky, in fairness.
This is a 1,000% true story about how a quiet all-American town of Salem absolutely lost its mind.
Oh, is this an updated kind of thing, is it?
Yeah, this is very hip and modern, and with it. It's Salem because there's witch hunts because it's social media.
Is the word good?
The word is not good. The word is, this is maybe entertaining if you're willing to go with it.
I'm not.
Okay.
The word is no.
And the word is panic. And then on Netflix this week, The Christmas Chronicles.
Oh, this is
Kurt Russell as Santa Claus.
What?
Yeah, come on, tell me you're not interested.
We need Grace for this. She's our resident Christmas movie expert.
I don't think this will be on Grace's Christmas movie list, unfortunately.
Why?
It may be a slightly different breed than the other Netflix Christmas movies.
Oh, dear.
It is from the director of Angry Birds movie, produced by Christopher Columbus, who gave you the first two Harry Potter movies.
No.
Home Alone.
No.
Okay. I quite enjoyed it. It is cheesy. It is old-fashioned. It has a precocious kid in a way that you couldn't get away with anymore. It's that kind of old-fashioned, remember when kids' movies didn't have to be smart? And he can just about get away with it because it's Christmas.
Really selling
No, I'm not really selling it
at all.
It does, however, it has a Kurt Russell gives it socks. It has a Jailhouse Rock sequence starring Santa Claus. There we go.
All right, there we go. Now I'm in.
Okay. Yeah. It's got this sort of warm, playful sense of humor running through it. It's also got this really weird, intense view of what Christmas is. There's a moment where a bunch of policemen are arresting Santa Claus. Then sounds start jingling in the distance. No. The cops look around, panicked. One of them asks, "What's that?" At which point, Kurt Russell, dressed in red, leans in and says, "It's sleigh bells. Aren't you listening?" Tell me you're not.
I'm in. It might be that's late.
That won one and lost one.
That sounds like the best film released in the last 2 weeks.
And then finally, absolutely finally, once and for all,
Go on.
The Girl in the Spider's Web.
Oh, this got absolutely hammered, hasn't it?
Yes, it bombed at the box office, got crushed by the Grinch.
The trailer looked dreadful.
It is what happens when you take an interesting concept and shear it of anything resembling an artistic vision. It is a movie that takes a character who should, by all accounts, be one of the greatest characters who speaks to this particular moment. Lisbeth Salander, who is a character who is an embodiment of the Me Too moment, a digitally native young woman, and shears her of that and drops her into a knockoff Bond movie plot involving nuclear codes, arms terrorism, shady deals, conspiracies. It's all horrible. It's horribly generic. And it does horrible things to the character. It strips out anything that made, and I know Ronan's not a big fan of the Fincher movie, but it strips out anything that made the Fincher movie interesting, which is that strong artistic vision and personalities driving it behind the scenes. The Fincher took a pulpy narrative and elevated it through wonderful casting and self-awareness.
It is, and I think the thing with the Fincher one is that he knew it wasn't a great book. He knew there was problems with it. He said, I'll film it anyway. I'll give you 2/3, if not 3/4 of a very good film, and the rest you can kind of go, so on.
What I rewatched it recently, and what I loved about it is it's Fincher playing with the idea of a Bond movie, casting Daniel Craig as a Bond girl. And I'm like, I'm there for that.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of that kind of going on.
Like, there's a moment where she's working on the computer and he comes in a dressing gown and cuddles up behind her like a water bottle.
It is better than the Swedish version.
It is better than the
Swedish. I don't
Yes.
like either of them.
And Rooney Mara's great.
But yeah, the girl with the spiders. The Girl in the Spider's Web is not a good movie by any stretch
I'm not
of
going
the
to see it, so I don't
imagination.
care.
And it's really a shame because Claire Foy deserves much, much better.
Nah, she's doing all right.
Okay.
Yeah, she's doing quite well.
I mean,
okay, fine.
she's the queen, for Christ's sake. What more does she want?
Well, she was also in First Man as well.
But Olivia
I
Colman is now the
wouldn't
queen.
hold that back.
All right, so if people are looking for a bit more Jay, a bit more Ronan in their lives, where can they find you
I'll
guys?
be asleep on this desk. Otherwise, I'm at Jay Coyle on Twitter.
I'll probably be screaming about Bohemian Rhapsody on Twitter at Baron Ronan.
You can follow me online at Darren_Mooney. I host another podcast, The 250, where last week we talked about Bohemian Rhapsody with Barry and Cassidy and Luke Dunn, which was a great discussion. There may have been singing. There may even have been serenading. It's something to behold. Have you ever wanted to hear myself and Andrew sing Bohemian Rhapsody?
Not a bit of it.
Well, then you can listen to a good 2/3 of the podcast.
Okay, I'm on it.
Out this week we are discussing 50 Shades of Grey with Luke. Sorry, not with Luke, with Grace and Marianne again. So that should be.
I still haven't seen 50 Shades of Grey. I might watch it because I haven't got enough to watch.
Jay, catch-up list. Watch in January.
No, stop.
It is possibly the most sensuous movie about contract negotiation ever.
I think you'll find that's Mamma Mia. Here we go again.
All right, on that note, take it easy, guys. Bye.
Bye.